The way I really got started writing about jazz was I was hanging out at the Copper Rail, which was this place, bar across the street from the Metropole, and Stanley Dance, British jazz critic, who later became a permanent resident of the U.S., but at the time he had come to New York to do a series of recordings for a label called Felstead, and I had become friendly with musicians, friendly enough for them to invite me to the sessions. One of the first ones was Buster Bailey, and Buster was really among the early friends I made among musicians, and Buster was, you know, the thing about Buster that surprised me when I first, got close up on him. He was at Metropole with Red Allen's band with J.C. Higginbotham, Coach Cole, sometimes Colin Hawkins on pianos, all-star band. The Metropole was a strange place altogether, but that's another story. But anyway, everybody came to the Copper Rail. Buster, who played such, really mobile clarinet, had really big hands and very broad fingers. It surprised me how he could do that delicate stuff on the clarinet with those big hands. The happiest I ever saw Buster was when he really wanted to be a classical musician at a time when it was very hard, if not impossible, for African American musicians to get into that field. Was when he was called to dub for somebody at Radio City Music Hall in the band there, which was not exactly the greatest classical orchestra, but they did play repertory, and he was there for a couple of weeks, and that really delighted him. But anyway, started going to these sessions, and the one that Buster did for Stanley was a really good one. I don't know, some of these things never seem to have come out, never been reissued on CD, I don't know.
Yeah, they're on CD.
Yeah.
I can help you with this.
So, Stanley, and the other one was the Coleman Hawkins session that Hawk asked me to come to, and and one was Dickie Wells with Vic, and then where they do that short, tall, fat, funny song. So Stanley came up to me and said, you seem to know all the musicians, and he said, Jazz Journal, which I knew that he was writing for, he had a column called Lightly and Politely, which was pretty good actually, sort of a little bit like the New Yorker talk of the town based. So he said, the Jazz Journal we've lost our New York correspondent. It was a guy that I really didn't know. And he said, if you could send the magazine a monthly newsletter, you seem to, you know what's going on and everything, that would be really nice. And he said, the magazine can't pay you anything, but he said, it will get you books and records that you can't get here. But then he said, and that was what convinced me, he said, and it will be good for the musicians. So that's how I really got started with that. And the musicians liked what I was writing when they got to see it, which was done, but people like Ned Hentoff, who at the time was reading everything on jazz and even writing about it, seemed to like what I did, so he recommended me to Downbeat. And that's a whole other story. My first assignment for Downbeat, let me digress because I think it'll fit in with what we're talking about. They wanted me to do an interview with Milt Jackson, and I didn't know Baggs. I knew, of course I knew who he was and what of him and everything. But it so happened that he was recording for Atlantic, was recording with Coleman Hawkins, whom I knew at the time, and that's where I was supposed to do the interview with him. I was supposed to come to the session and then write an interview. And no, I was very nervous about it. And Milt didn't know me from Adam. So Coleman, who knew about this, I was at the session and there was a break in the session, and that's when I came up. I had told Hawk about this, and I came up to Milt, and started talking with him. So Milt was kind of standoffish. Where's this guy? So Hawk came over and put his arm around my shoulder and kind of said, this guy is a friend of mine, so that did it. So after that, the interview went beautifully, but that was, like a good deed that Hawk did for me. So anyway, I mean, to me, all that in my life, to the fact that I got to know quite a few of these great musicians and got to know them well, Roy Eldridge and I became such good friends that he, played at my son's bar mitzvah, my Adam's bar mitzvah. Well, anyway, I mean, this was very, very important to me. And there were people like John Wilson who said that it wasn't proper, really not right for jazz critics to get to know musicians too well, because they would lose their objectivity. But that's bullshit.
The other part of that is if you're writing about Roy or Coleman Hawkins or Dickie Wells or Vic or Buster Bailey, I think objectivity is irrelevant. They're demigods. They make great music, and your job is to sort of report on it, period.
But not only that, but you don't necessarily, perhaps you lose some of your objectivity because, you start, you love these guys and what they do. But on the other hand, you also become aware of what the problems are that they encounter in their professional lives, and you can deal with that on a level that if you didn't know them, you wouldn't really understand, what they're asked to do or asked not to do, and things that have to do with an artist's life and with profession. You get to understand it better. And relationships between musicians, which in jazz are so, of the utmost importance, which brings me to, we were talking about Buster. When I had the good fortune of getting involved with doing these concerts at the Museum of Modern Art, one of the first person that, because Buster Bailey very rarely had an opportunity to do something under his own leadership, I wanted him. That was the first thing, concerts I got to do was Buster. But we talked about, who to get, and I made a mistake because I was very fond of Joe Thomas. Joe was one of my favorite trumpet players, very underrated guy, lovely sound, just great. But there was a personality thing involved there. So, Buster didn't want to tell me to say no when I suggested Joe, But what happened was that when John Wilson, who was just mentioned, Joe reviewed this in the Times, he praised Joe well over Buster, joking. And I think Buster knew that this was a potential problem because the trumpet is such a dominant instrument. And Joe had very few chances to show himself in front of a fairly large audience there. So that was an early mistake that I made. After that, I learned that if I was producing something, to go with what the leader wanted and not what I wanted to, you know. But this was, and this was my, my first, so, you make mistakes. But it was nice anyway. No, Buster was a lovely guy. And one of the things about Buster that I didn't know, and I was surprised, kind of, was that although I should have known from one of his recordings, which is a thing he made under his own name called Light Up, where he sings about getting high. So he was a viper. And he was probably, my friend Nat Lorberface, he was really the one who introduced me to that particular thing, known as the weed and many other, which is now legal in many places, so you don't have to be so, careful in talking about it. But anyway, that was one aspect of Buster that I didn't know. But it tells you, he all that precision stuff that he had to do with John Kirby, my goodness, he was so, he could have been a great classical clarinetist.
I can't think of a recording of Buster's where you hear him miss a note or make a mistake or anything like that. And I've had long discussions with a friend of mine whose name is Andrew Samet, who thinks Buster is really, really, truly underrated as a musician. And the people say his tone is thin and all that. And he can really play.
It was so kind of strange and both happy and sad was the end of Buster's life when he joined Louis' All-Stars, and they were together for the first time. They'd been together with Fletcher Henderson in the 20s. I think actually Buster was one of the people who told Fletcher about Louis, because they had worked together. Buster was in King Oliver's band.
Yeah.
So then they got together again at the end. I thought it was wonderful just to have Buster in there, but it really, just like Billy Kyle, who had been his mate with Kirby, it really did him in because he wasn't used to that heavy traveling schedule and all that work schedule. So I think it's he would have left us anyway at some point, but it kind of accelerated his demise. But it was fun. He actually wound up, he's in a movie with the All-Stars, right? He's in a not very good movie about, has to do with teenagers.
When the boys meet the girls. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, and they perform the Deathless song, Why Do I Know This? Throw It Out Your Mind. I think Connie Francis is in it too.
Bowie had to deal with a lot of dog tunes, but he always managed to do something with them.
Yeah.